As I sat in a quaint Brooklyn coffee shop, sipping an overpriced latte that to embody the very essence of inflation, I couldn't help but reflect on the seismic shifts occurring in our economic was thick with the aroma of freshly ground beans and the palpable anxiety of patrons discussing their latest Robinhood investments. It struck me that we are living through a pivotal moment in economic history, one that future generations will study with the same intensity we reserve for the Great Depression or the 2008 financial crisis. The Federal Reserve, long revered as the maestro of monetary policy, stands at a crossroads. For decades, this institution has wielded interest rates like a conductor's baton, orchestrating the delicate balance between growth and inflation. But as we from the pandemic-induced economic turmoil, it's becoming increasingly clear that the Fed's once omnipotent influence is waning. The central bank finds itself in a position akin to a seasoned rock star realizing that their greatest hits no longer resonate with the younger crowd. Let's rewind for a moment to understand how we arrived at this juncture. The year is 2020, and the world is plunged into chaos by an invisible enemy, the coronavirus. As nations scrambled to contain the spread, economies ground to a halt. Governments, faced with the specter of a global depression, opened their coffers and unleashed a torrent of fiscal stimulus. It was as if we had collectively decided to treat our economic ailments with a potent cocked and fiscal policy, served with a generous side of quantitative easing. At first, this approach seemed to work wonders. The stock market rebounded with the vigor of a caffeinated squirrel, unemployment rates eventually declined, and for a brief moment, it appeared we had dodged an economic bullet. But as any doctor will tell you, powerful medicine often comes with side effects. In this case, the side effect was inflation, a phenomenon that had been dormant for so long that many young economists had only read about it in textbooks. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, ever the optimist, initially dismissed these inflationary pressures as transitory. It was a bit like a weatherman assuring us that the Category 5 hurricane barreling towards us was just a passing shower's miscalculation, wasn't just a minor forecasting error. It was a seismic misjudgment that would shake the very foundations of the Fed's credibility. As inflation soared to levels not seen in 4 decades, Americans found themselves in a financial pressure cooker. The cost of living increased by over 9% in a year, a figure that might seem abstract until you're standing in the grocery store, staring at a $7 carton of eggs and wondering if you've accidentally wandered into Whole Foods. This surge in prices wasn't just affecting the coastal elites or the finance brothers on Wall Street. It was hitting middle America where it hurt, in their wallets and at their dinner tables. The Fed, realizing its error, began to aggressively hike interest rates in a desperate attempt to tame the inflationary beast. It was like watching a person who had been leisurely strolling suddenly break into a frantic sprint, realizing they were late for an important appointment. But this belated reaction did more than just bruise the Fed's ego. It potentially eroded its power and influence in ways we're only beginning to understand. To truly grasp the significance of this shift, to zoom out and examine the broader economic landscape. For the past 4 decades, central banks have been the undisputed champions of inflation control. Their weapon of choice? Interest rates. By raising rates, they could cool an overheating economy. By lowering them, they could stimulate growth. It was a simple, elegant solution to a complex problem. But as with many simple solutions, its effectiveness began to wane in the face of an increasingly complex world. The pandemic exposed a crucial weakness in the central bank's armor: their inability to effectively combat supply-side shocks. When the world shut down, it wasn't just demand that disappeared. Supply chains were disrupted on a global scale. Suddenly, we found ourselves in a world where semiconductors were as scarce as common sense at a flat Earth convention. Energy shortages loomed like specters over Europe, and the price of shipping a container across the ocean skyrocketed to levels that would make even a Silicon Valley startup blush. These supply-side issues proved to be formidable foes for traditional monetary policy. After all, you can't solve a chip shortage by adjusting interest rates, no matter how vigorously you wave that monetary policy wand. It's like trying to fix a leaky roof with a new coat of paint. It might look better for a while, but it doesn't address the underlying problem. As central banks grappled with these new challenges, governments began to step into the breach. We're witnessing a resurgence of interventionist policies that would have made FDR nod in approval. Governments are no longer content to sit on the sidelines and let the invisible hand of the market its magic. Instead, they're rolling up their sleeves and getting elbow-deep in economic management. Take, for instance, the push for greater control over supply chains. In the wake of the pandemic, the concept of strategic autonomy has gained traction faster than a TikTok dance challenge. Nations are reevaluating their dependence on global supply networks, particularly for critical goods like medical supplies and advanced technologies. The United States, under both the rations, has taken steps to reshore semiconductor production, viewing it as a matter of national security. It's as if countries around the world simultaneously realized they were wearing the economic equivalent of the emperor's new clothes and decided it was time to start weaving their own fabric. But government intervention doesn't stop at supply chains. We're seeing a renewed focus on consumer protection and affordability. Politicians, sensing the public's frustration with rising prices, are taking aim at industries they accuse of prices like watching a high-stakes game of economic whack-a-mole, with lawmakers eager to smack down any business they perceive as taking advantage of the inflationary environment. The housing market, long a cornerstone of the American dream and a perennial source of economic anxiety, is also coming under increased government scrutiny. As home prices soar to levels that make millennial first-time buyers weep into their avocado toast, policymakers are exploring ways to make housing more affordable. It's a noble goal, but one that treads a fine line between necessary intervention and potential market distortion. This shift towards more active government involvement in the economy represents a significant departure from the laissez-faire approach that has economic thinking for decades. It's as if we've collectively decided that the invisible hand of the market needs a visible helping hand from the government. But this transition is not without its risks and controversies. Critics argue that increased government intervention could lead to inefficiencies, stifle innovation, and ultimately harm the very consumers it aims to protect. They point to historical examples of well-intentioned policies that had unintended negative consequences. Remember the 1970s wage and price controls? They worked about as well as using a band-aid to fix a broken leg. Proponents, on the other hand, contend that the complexities of the modern global economy require a more nuanced and active approach to economic management. They argue that leaving everything to market forces in an era of climate change, technological disruption, and geopolitical tensions is like trying to navigate a ship through a storm without a rudder. As this debate rages on, central banks find themselves in an uncomfortable position. They've succeeded in bringing inflation back to target levels, but at what aggressive rate hikes have left many wondering if we're heading for a recession, or if we can achieve the elusive soft landing that economists speak of with the reverence usually reserved for unicorns and honest politicians. Moreover, the very nature of inflation management is evolving. It's no longer a solo performance by central banks, but rather an ensemble piece featuring a cast of government agencies, regulatory bodies, and fiscal policymakers. Managing inflation in the future may indeed become more of a team sport, as suggested in the Bloomberg Originals mini-documentary, How Central Banks Won the Battle but Lost the War. This transition raises important questions about the independence of central banks, a principle that has been sacrosanct in economic orthodoxy for decades. As governments take a more active role in managing inflation and economic stability, will central banks be able to maintain their autonomy? Or will we see a gradual erosion of their independence, with monetary policy becoming increasingly influenced by political considerations? The implications of this shift extend far beyond the realm of economics. They touch on fundamental questions about the role of government in society, the balance between free markets and regulation, and even the nature of democracy in a world of complex, interconnected economies. As I finish my now lukewarm latte and observe the diverse crowd in this Brooklyn cafe, the freelance graphic designer furiously typing on her MacBook, the retired couple poring over their investment statements, the young barista dreaming of home ownership, I'm struck by how these abstract economic concepts translate into real-world impacts on individual lives. The housewife struggling to balance her grocery budget in the face of rising food prices, the small business owner grappling with supply chain disruptions, the recent graduate burdened by student loans in a high-interest rate environment. These are the human faces of our changing economic landscape. Their stories remind us that economics is not just about numbers and models, but about people and their aspirations, fears, and daily struggles. As we navigate this new economic reality, it's crucial that we don't lose sight of these human elements. The decisions made by central bankers, government officials, and policymakers have real-world consequences that ripple through society in ways both obvious and subtle. Looking ahead, it's clear that we're entering uncharted territory. The old economic being rewritten in real time, and the rules of the game are changing. Central banks, once the undisputed referees of the economic arena, now find themselves as just one player among many in a complex and nuanced game. This new paradigm will require a delicate balancing act. We must find a way to harness the benefits of government intervention, greater resilience, improved consumer protection, more equitable growth, while avoiding the pitfalls of overreach and inefficiency. It will require a level of cooperation and coordination between different economic actors that we haven't seen in generations. At the same time, we must be vigilant against the risks of politicizing economic policy. The temptation for governments to use their newfound economic influence for short-term political gain could be strong. It will be up to civil society, the media, and engaged citizens to hold our leaders accountable and ensure that economic decisions are made in the best long-term interests of society as a whole. Education will play a crucial role in this new economic landscape. As the mechanisms of inflation control and economic management become more complex, there's a risk of widening the gap between those who understand these systems and those who don't. We must strive to make economic literacy a priority, empowering citizens to engage meaningfully in debates about economic policy and to make informed decisions about their own financial futures. Innovation, too, will be key. As we grapple with new economic challenges, we'll need fresh ideas and approaches. This could mean exploring alternative economic models, leveraging technology to improve policy implementation, or finding novel ways to balance the needs of different stakeholders in our economic system. The role of the private sector in this new economic paradigm also deserves consideration. As governments take a more active role in managing the economy, how will businesses adapt? Will we see a new era of public-private partnerships? Or will increased regulation stifle entrepreneurship? The answers to these questions will shape the economic landscape for generations to come. Internationally, the shift in economic management approaches could have far-reaching implications. As different countries adopt varying levels of government intervention, we may see new patterns of global trade and investment emerge. The concept of comparative advantage, a cornerstone of international economics, may need to be reevaluated in a world where government policy plays a more significant role in shaping economic outcomes. Climate change adds another layer of complexity to this evolving economic picture. As the world grapples with the urgent need to transition to a more sustainable economy, the interplay between environmental policy, economic management, and inflation control will become increasingly important. Central banks and governments will need to find ways to promote green growth while maintaining price stability, a challenge that may require new tools and approaches. As I leave the coffee shop and step out onto the bustling Brooklyn street, I'm struck by the sense of being at a historical inflection point. The decisions we make now about the role of central banks, the extent of government intervention, the balance between different economic objectives, will shape the economic landscape for decades to come. The challenges are significant, but so are the opportunities. If we can navigate this successfully, we have the chance to create a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable economic system. One that's better equipped to handle the complexities of the modern world and more responsive to the needs of all members of society. But success is not guaranteed. It will require wisdom, foresight, and a willingness to challenge long-held economic orthodoxies. It will demand collaboration on a scale we've rarely seen, bridging divides between different economic schools of thought, between public and private sectors, and between nations. As I watch New Yorkers hurry past, each absorbed in their own economic microcosm, I'm reminded of the stakes involved. The abstract concepts we've discussed, inflation, monetary policy, government intervention, translate into real impacts on real lives. The decisions made in the halls of the in-government offices will determine whether that young couple can afford to buy a home, whether that small business owner can keep their doors open, whether that retiree can maintain their standard of living. In the end, economics is about people. As we chart this new course, we must never lose sight of that fundamental truth. Isn't just to achieve some abstract notion of economic stability or efficiency, but to create a system that serves the needs of all members of society, that provides opportunities for growth and prosperity, and that can adapt to the challenges of an ever-changing world. The era of central banks as the sole guardians of economic stability may be coming to an end, but a new, potentially more dynamic and inclusive approach to economic management is emerging. It's an approach that recognizes the complexities of our modern world and the limitations of any single institution or policy tool. As we move forward into this new economic reality, we would do well to approach it with a mix of optimism and caution. We should be open to new ideas and approaches, willing to challenge our assumptions and rethink our economic models. But we should also be mindful of the lessons of history, wary of quick fixes or overly simplistic solutions to complex problems. The future of economy, and by extension, the future of our society, will be shaped by the decisions we make in the coming years. It's a responsibility we all share, not just as economists or policymakers, but as citizens and participants in this grand economic experiment we call modern capitalism. As I make my way home, the setting sun casting long shadows across the city skyline, I'm filled with a sense of both trepidation and excitement. We stand at the threshold of a new economic era, one filled with challenges but also brimming with possibilities. How we navigate this transition will define not just our economic future, but the very nature of our society and our democracy. The central banks may have won the immediate battle against inflation, but the war for long-term economic stability and prosperity is far from over. It's a war that will be fought not just in the boardrooms of the Federal Reserve or the halls of government, but in the countless daily economic decisions made by millions of individuals. As we embark on this new chapter in our economic history, let us do so with clear eyes, open minds, and a commitment to creating an economic system that truly serves the needs of all. The journey ahead may be uncertain, but the potential rewards in a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable economy are well worth the effort. In the words of the great economist John Maynard Keynes, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as in escaping from old ones. As we face the economic challenges of the 21st century, let us heed this advice. Let us be bold in our thinking, innovative in our approaches, and always mindful of the human impact of our economic decisions. The future of our economy is in our hands. Let's shape Ely.